My name is Claire Holloway. I am 32 years old. Last Friday at 2 p.m., 4 men in sharp tailored suits and 2 police officers marched into the glossy City of London headquarters of my husband's IT company. My husband, David, was sitting at the head of a long conference table, casually barking orders at his subordinates. He always loved feeling like the master of the universe. When the lead investigator called out his name and produced an arrest warrant for grand fraud, David let out a patronizing smirk, looking toward the door, utterly convinced it was a stupid mistake. But when I stepped out from behind the officers and laid down a printout of our home router's IP logs alongside the statements from his mother's hidden offshore account, every ounce of color instantly drained from his face. The handcuffs clicked shut around his wrists with a sharp, definitive snap, right in front of his frozen, staring colleagues. What happened in the next 40 minutes inside the interrogation room destroyed our marriage forever. But I need you to hear exactly how the person closest to me spent years conjuring millions in debt under my name just so I could never leave him. It's funny how human memory clings to completely insignificant details when the world around you begins to shatter. I remember that on that particular Thursday evening, our kitchen smelled of lavender fabric softener and burnt onions. That heavy, greasy odor had baked itself into the expensive linen curtains, making me feel like I was suffocating. I sat across from David, watching him lazily move his fork across his plate, smearing the remnants of his pasta over the porcelain. He was wearing a stretched-out home t-shirt with a rock band logo, the exact one I had tried to secretly throw into the rag bin 3 times, only for him to invariably fish it back out. His silhouette, once lean, athletic, and radiating confidence, now carried a kind of sticky, triumphant laziness. The man I had fallen in love with 7 years ago at an economic forum in Edinburgh had eroded. In his place was an egoistic shell that grew more aggressive with each passing month. I am a senior financial analyst at a major international hedge fund. My life has always been a matrix of precise numbers, charts, strict discipline, and rigid control. I prided myself on managing our family budget in Excel down to the last penny, knowing every tax loophole, deduction rule, and never taking out a consumer loan in my life, viewing them as financial illiteracy. Our townhouse in Richmond was purchased entirely with my premarital savings. The car was registered in my name and fully paid off. My reputation was flawless. David was an architect. At least, that was how he introduced himself when we met. He had ambitious projects, the soul of an artist, and incredible charisma. But for the past 2 years, his creative crisis had dragged on. He lost a contract with a major firm, withdrew into himself, and stopped looking for work. At first, I supported him like a loving wife. Take a break. Find your true path. I earn enough for both of us. There's plenty of money. But over time, his mental unemployment mutated into a toxic, suffocating tyranny. He started checking grocery receipts. He questioned why I bought a specific brand of cheese instead of the one that was 2 pounds cheaper. He demanded an accounting for every single cup of coffee with my friends and threw ugly tantrums if I was even 15 minutes late coming home from work. "You're funned again?" he would sneer through his teeth whenever I walked through the door exhausted. "Or did you have another urgent meeting with one of those young analysts? You've gotten greedy, Claire. Your millions in the city have gone to your head. You've stopped respecting the husband who gave you his best years." I endured it. I told myself it was just the depression of a bruised male ego due to temporary unfulfillment. I tried to smooth over the rough edges, apologized for my high salary, and tried to keep myself small. But on that Thursday evening, something inside me finally burned out. I realized I no longer loved the man sitting across from me. I feared him. "You didn't finish your food," David stated without looking up, setting his fork down. His voice was flat, chilling, completely devoid of any emotion. This was his new tone, one he had been practicing for the last 6 months. The tone of a judge mortally bored by a defendant's testimony. "I'm not hungry, David," I replied quietly but firmly, pushing the plate aside. "We need to talk. Seriously, this can't go on anymore." He let out a barely perceptible smirk. That sound, a short, dismissive snort through his nose, made my fingers clench under the table so hard that my nails dug into my palms. Again? He finally raised his gray eyes to meet mine. There was no anger or hurt in them, only a cold, sated, terrifying calmness. Claire, if this is another lecture about how I'm finding myself for too long, spare me. I look through the vacancies. The market is dead right now, you know that perfectly well. Not everyone is as lucky as you, sitting in a warm seat at a fund, allocating someone else's budget without breaking a sweat. This isn't about your job, David. I took a deep breath, trying to steady the tremor in my voice. It's about us, or rather, the fact that there's nothing left of us. You aren't just looking for yourself. You've turned my life into hell. You control my every step. You snoop through my personal belongings. You constantly humiliate me. I can't do this anymore. I've made up my mind. I want a divorce. I spoke the word. Divorce. It hung in the air of the kitchen, heavy like a thundercloud. I braced myself inwardly, expecting anything. Shouting, smashing plates, accusations of greed, tears or reproaches. I was ready for a grand scandal. But what happened in the next minute made the blood run cold in my veins. David didn't even flinch. He slowly picked up a paper napkin, precisely, almost theatrically dabbed his lips, crumpled it up, and leaned back against the spine of his wooden chair. A strange, patronizing, almost pitiful smile crept across his face. It was the look an adult gives a 3-year-old child who announces they are moving to the moon right this second. Divorce? He repeated softly, drawn out, almost tenderly. Well, that's your choice. Go right ahead, of course. I won't hold you back by force. You can't force love, right? But I do have one purely practical, down-to-earth question for you, Claire. How exactly do you plan to pay off the debts? Did you forget about our joint credit? For a second, I lost the ability to speak. I thought I had misheard. The air in the room grew thick and viscous. What debts, David? Are you delusional? I frowned, staring intently into his face. We don't have any debts. Our property was bought with my money, the mortgage is closed, the car is paid off. We don't have a single credit obligation. David sighed, shaking his head sorrowfully, as if genuinely saddened by my sudden amnesia and absent-mindedness. Oh, come on, Claire. Forgot about our large commercial loans? The money we took from the banks for, well, the development of your projects, your health, maintaining our lifestyle while you were changing jobs. You might be our great financial analyst, the master of numbers, but sometimes you can be so forgetful. Go on, file for divorce, I don't mind. But keep this in mind. Half of those millions belong to you by law when the property is divided. I'm just curious how your management in the city will react when official requests from the bailiffs land on their desks to freeze your accounts. Your security department is incredibly strict over there, isn't it? A top financial manager with multi-million-dollar defaults and lawsuits means instant termination under a loss of trust clause, with no right to ever return to the profession. There was no shouting or overt threat in his voice. There was only an absolute, ironclad, lethal certainty. Everything inside me went numb. I knew my husband. This wasn't the bluff of a madman or a stupid attempt to play me. This was a trap, a snare that had just snapped shut around my neck with a dull thud. The night following that conversation dissolved into an endless, suffocating nightmare. David calmly stood up from the table, tenderly wished me sweet dreams, walked up to the second-floor bedroom, and closed the door behind him. A few minutes later, I heard him switch off the light. He fell asleep instantly, his breathing even and serene, like a man with an absolutely clear conscience. I remained sitting in the kitchen. Time froze. The grandfather clock in the hallway ticked so loudly that the monotonous rhythm echoed in my temples as a physical, throbbing pain. He's bluffing, I repeated to myself like a mantra, burying my face in my hands and rocking from side to side. My God, Claire, calm down. You are a professional. You audit every account. He's just a cowardly freeloader who is panicking at the thought of losing his meal ticket and comfortable lifestyle. He knows your vulnerability, your career, and he's hitting it to terrify you. This is standard abuse and dirty manipulation. But an analyst's logic demanded facts. Sleep would have been impossible even with the strongest sleeping pills. By 5 a.m., as the sky outside turned the cold, muddy gray of a London dawn, I was sitting in front of my work laptop. My fingers trembled faintly, refusing to hit the right keys as I entered my credentials onto the official secure portal of the UK Credit Bureau. For someone in my profession, checking this site was the equivalent of basic personal hygiene. I reviewed my credit history once a year just to ensure the system hadn't glitched and no fraudsters had compromised my data. My last check was 9 months ago. Everything had been perfect. A clean green zone, zero debt. I submitted an emergency request for a full, comprehensive report detailing all hidden commercial contracts. The system froze. The loading wheel on the screen spun, and those 2 minutes felt like an eternity spent standing on a scaffold. Through the wall, David's breathing remained deep, even, and peaceful. The screen blinked. Download complete. A multi-megabyte PDF file dropped into my folder. I took a large gulp of entirely cold, bitter black coffee and clicked the file open. For the first few seconds, I just stared blankly at the screen, categorically refusing to process what my eyes were seeing. My brain, trained to spot hidden discrepancies and anomalies in the multi-billion-dollar reports of transnational corporations within nanoseconds, simply blocked the incoming data, activating a psychological defense mechanism. Where a neat green bar reading, "No outstanding credit obligations, rating AA+, had stood my entire life, there now burned a thick, massive, aggressive red marker. Status: active defaulted obligations. Legal proceedings in preparation stage. I held my breath and scrolled down to the account breakdown. The air rushed out of my lungs with a sharp hiss, and a feeling of molten lead flooded my chest. HSBC Bank. A large commercial business loan dated November 14th of last year. Amount: £1,500,000. Processed online. Barclays Bank. A secured loan against commercial assets dated February 22nd of the current year. Amount: £1,100,000. Processed online. Microfinance organizations and private funds. 5 different express contracts processed as a bundle in mid-March. Total amount: £400,000. The total debt, factoring in accumulated interest, penalties, and late fees over months of malicious non-payment, was rapidly approaching £3 million sterling. And every single one of these documents, contracts, and agreements was registered in my name. My passport data, my national insurance number, my personal tax ID. Beneath every single contract sat a stamp. Signed via Verified Individual Electronic Digital Signature, EDS, of user Claire Holloway. I sat in the complete darkness of the dawning kitchen, feeling as though the walls of our house were physically closing in, ready to grind me into dust. £3 million. For a top-tier financial analyst in the city, the leak of such information into public databases or bailiff registries didn't just mean termination. It meant a permanent blacklisting for the rest of my life. It was the death of a career for which I had sacrificed sleep, a personal life, and rest, working 14 to 16 hours a day for the last decade of my life. At that exact moment, a floorboard in the hallway let out a quiet, familiar creak. My entire body flinched, and I snapped my head up. David was standing in the kitchen doorway. He was in his lounge shorts, hair disheveled, eyes heavy with sleep. Ignoring me entirely, he walked over to the fridge, pulled out a carton of milk, took several large gulps directly from the spout, and only then slowly turned in my direction. His gaze instantly locked onto the laptop screen, where the bright red table of the credit bureau cast an ominous glow in the twilight. He wasn't surprised. He wasn't frightened that I had found out. On the contrary, a deep, sated, almost tender satisfaction flashed in his gray eyes. It was the look of a puppeteer watching a marionette finally realize that the strings are in his hands. "Well, there it is," he said quietly, casually wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. "And you didn't believe me yesterday, Claire. Called me a daydreamer. I told you we have problems. Or rather, let's call a spade a spade. You have problems. Colossal ones at that. But don't stress so much, you're shaking all over. I love you, despite everything. And if you stay home, if we forget this foolishness and egoism regarding a divorce once and for all, if you become a normal, obedient wife, I'll help you sort this all out. We'll figure something out together, clear these debts over a couple of decades. We're a family, Claire. You drown without me. He took 2 steps forward, closing the distance between us, and reached out to place his wide palm on my shoulder. His fingers felt freezing and slick against my skin, like the hide of a reptile. Instinctively, with a shudder of revulsion, I recoiled backward, nearly flipping my heavy chair over. "Don't touch me," I whispered. My voice broke into a rasp. My throat was bone dry. "What did you do, David? What the hell did you do to me?" He only let out a disappointed, theatrical sigh, slipping his hand into his shorts pocket and shaking his head. "I didn't do anything, darling. That's your legal signature on all the contracts. Your documents. Banks believe in facts, not emotions. You taught me that yourself. Anyway, you're in shock right now. That's natural. Go get some sleep. We still have a very, very long time to spend together." He turned and walked back to the bedroom, the soft slap of his bare feet fading down the hardwood floor. I was left entirely alone with the glowing screen, realizing a terrifying truth. The man with whom I had shared my bed, my home, and every single one of my secrets for the last 7 years, had methodically, cold-bloodedly, professionally, and ruthlessly dismantled my entire life. If I were an ordinary woman, detached from the brutal world of corporate law and high finance, I probably would have thrown a grand tantrum. I would have screamed, demanded answers, wept, smashed dishes, or perhaps run straight to the nearest local police precinct that very day, committing the ultimate mistake of fraud victims by tipping off my executioner before holding any cards. But I was a financial analyst. My job description required maintaining a freezing, almost surgical composure when millions were being stolen around me. My brain, successfully locking away the destructive panic and fear, automatically flipped into professional, forensic audit mode. On Monday morning, I woke up with a heavy head but a perfectly lucid mind. Calling my secretary at the hedge fund, I called in sick for 2 days, citing a sudden severe migraine. The moment David left the house, he was now looking for new projects at local gyms and coffee shops, disappearing for hours at a time. I went to work. My first stop was the main branch of HSBC in the city. I had to endure a long, humiliating identity verification process with the branch's head of security and catch his cold, judgmental stare before they finally handed over a certified copy of my credit file. "Ma'am, you executed these yourself," the manager said half-heartedly, sliding a thick stack of stapled pages across the desk. "The agreement was finalized remotely via your verified online banking profile. All SMS verification codes were entered correctly, and the final paper copy was certified using your unique electronic digital signature, EDS. The bank has no legal grounds to doubt the legitimacy of the transaction." I stormed out of the stifling bank building, got into my car, locked the doors, and spread the documents across the steering wheel. My eyes, hardwired to parse massive datasets, greedily scanned the lines. EDS. Individual key. A key that can be issued online in 15 minutes if you possess full access to a person's private data, high-resolution scans of their passport, national insurance number, and their personal mobile phone. And right there, the puzzle pieces in my mind began to click together with a sickening, terrifying clarity. A year ago, in May, I had fallen severely ill, a brutal strain of influenza that left me with a burning fever touching 40. I spent a week lying in the bedroom in a semi-delirious state, barely aware of my surroundings. David had been astonishingly attentive back then, bringing me hot tea with lemon, administering pills right on schedule, and constantly taking my phone away, soothingly murmuring, "Rest, Claire. I'll handle your work messages and turn off notifications so you won't be disturbed." My laptop always sat on the desk in our home office. He knew the password because I had given it to him years ago trusting him completely. That window of time was more than enough for him to register an EDS in my name, validate it via my phone, and verify all the hidden accounts. But the most fascinating and terrifying detail lay deeper within the itemized transaction history. The funds, the very same £1,500,000 from HSBC and £1,100,000 from Barclays, had hit temporary clearing accounts opened in my name, and on the exact same day, a mere 20 minutes later, were wired via international SWIFT transfers to an external account. I looked at the ultimate recipient of the funds, a transfer to a foreign currency account held by an individual at a small commercial bank in Cyprus, an offshore haven notorious for its lenient compliance regulations. Beneficiary, Margaret K. Margaret. That was David's mother's name. An elderly woman who had spent her entire life without ever leaving a remote Scottish village, nestled in the hills, and who, for as long as I had known her, barely knew how to operate a microwave or a basic flip phone. Yet, an account in her name sat active in Limassol. I leaned back into the leather seat of my car, feeling a wave of suffocating nausea rise to my throat, which a second later dissolved into a burning, crystal-clear, ringing fury. He hadn't spent the money. He hadn't gambled it away on underground markets, secretly purchased luxury real estate, or blown it on mistresses. He was simply accumulating it in his mother's offshore account. David's plan was sickeningly cynical, massive, and beautifully simple. Drive me into an artificial, tightly controlled debt trap that I didn't even know existed. He personally intercepted every paper notification and bank demand from our physical mailbox, always grabbing the mail first under the guise of being helpful. Push the situation to a boiling point where the banks would initiate lawsuits and unleash debt collectors. Issue his ultimatum. You will never leave me, because without me you are nothing. You'll be fired in disgrace from the fund, and you'll end up on the street without a penny to your name. And once I finally broke down completely, turning into a compliant shadow of myself, he would save me, slowly dripping money back from his mother's hidden account to allegedly help me clear the debts, thereby shackling me to him through a lifetime of guilt, obligation, and slavish obedience. This wasn't just financial blackmail. This was an engineered, cold-blooded psychological and economic enslavement designed to span decades. I turned the car key. The trembling in my hands was entirely gone. Fear had been replaced by cold, lethal calculation. David thought he was playing a game of cat and mouse with a terrified victim. He forgot that his wife was a senior forensic analyst in the city. And right now, I was going to open a chess match where he didn't stand a single chance of survival. I returned to our Richmond townhouse 40 minutes before David was scheduled to return from his walk. Inside, my veins burned with rage, but by the time the key turned in the lock, my face had already become a perfectly rehearsed mask of composure. I shut down the living human being inside me entirely. Only a cold, analytical tool remained. "How are things, darling?" David walked into the kitchen, not even taking off his expensive wool overcoat, and gave me a condescending, patronizing pat on the shoulder. "Thought about my offer from yesterday? Changed your mind about the divorce?" I dropped my gaze to the floor, simulating utter despair, staring at my fingers as I forced out a quiet, broken, terrified sigh. I checked the credit bureau statement, David. The numbers are real. £3 million. I don't understand how this happened. I'm in complete shock. I'm utterly terrified. If management at the fund finds out about this, I'll be thrown out the door the same day without a penny of severance. My career is finished." David let out a satisfied, smug smile. It was the repulsive smirk of a predator realizing that its trapped prey has stopped fighting the netting and is now passively waiting for its fate. He took off his coat, unhurriedly sat down at the table across from me, and casually crossed one leg over the other. "Well, there it is. A fantastic first step toward your recovery, Claire. Accepting reality. I told you yesterday, this world is brutal, and you thought way too highly of yourself with your multi-million-dollar budgets and your career in the city. You're strong and independent on paper, but in reality, you're just a foolish little girl drowning in debt. But don't worry. As long as you're with me, as long as you behave correctly, appreciate what I do for you, and meet my conditions. We'll get through this. To start, hand over your credit and debit cards. I'll manage your salary and oversee all expenses myself. We need to practice extreme austerity, darling." I nodded submissively, opened my designer handbag, and pulled out my 2 primary banking cards where my salary was deposited. Sliding them across the table to him, I forced my fingertips to tremble slightly. David claimed the plastic with the air of a general accepting the unconditional surrender of a defeated army. He was absolutely certain of his victory. He believed he dictated my every breath. My husband had no idea that an hour before returning home, I had driven to a bank branch he had never even heard of, opened a completely clean, unlinked account protected by a complex password and 2-factor authentication tied to a secret new phone number, and moved the entirety of my core personal savings there, leaving only negligible balances on my old cards for appearances so as not to trigger his suspicion. The dangerous game had officially begun. The following morning, instead of committing the amateur mistake of going to a local police station, where a rank-and-file detective would have drowned in logs and digital certificate audits for months, giving David ample time to sniff out danger, I headed to a prestigious law firm in Mayfair. I was met by Mr. Vance, a legendary high-stakes, white-collar criminal defense attorney, a man with a piercing gaze of steel-gray eyes and impeccable aristocratic manners. He had spent his career defending multinational corporations from internal embezzlement and knew absolutely everything there was to know about cyber fraud. In his spacious office, which smelled of premium tobacco, polished wood, and strong espresso, I laid out every single statement from the banks and the credit bureau. Mr. Vance listened to me in absolute silence, resting his chin on his hand, never interrupting with a single word. When I concluded my narrative regarding Cyprus and David's mother, a dark, sharp smile touched his lips as he removed his glasses. "Your husband, Claire, committed the textbook error of all domestic abusers and petty fraudsters. He assumed that because he operated in a virtual space using proxy computers, he was entirely invisible and untraceable. But the internet remembers every breath and every click. For the banks to completely void these insane debts and rule the contracts invalid, simply declaring, 'That's not my signature,' won't cut it. We need to provide the prosecution with an ironclad alibi and a definitive digital footprint that tethers David to a specific chair at a specific second in time." "What do you need me to do?" I asked, prepared for any risk. "First and most critical, the logs from your home internet router. All of these loans were executed online via user profiles. Every single time a digital application hit the bank's servers, their systems automatically logged the unique IP address of the sender. We must prove that every single request originated exclusively from your townhouse in Richmond. Second, your personal alibi during those exact windows." For the first time in days, a genuine predatory smile spread across my face. "Our hedge fund operates under a paranoid, multi-tiered security protocol, Mr. Vance. Entry into the building and access to every individual floor requires a biometric retina scan. Every single movement I make inside the office is tracked by our internal system minute by minute. Furthermore, every work computer runs an aggressive time-tracking software that logs every single keystroke and mouse movement." "Magnificent!" The attorney's eyes gleamed with professional excitement. "We will cross-reference the timelines. If on Wednesday, November 14th, at 11:15 a.m., a digital application for $1.5 million hit HSBC from your residential IP address, while at that exact microsecond your retina was being scanned on the 40th floor of a city skyscraper while you were leading a board meeting, we have a 100% legal alibi. But we need to catch him holding the evidence, his personal computer. Can you gain access to it?" "The password to his iMac is our anniversary date," I said quietly. "He's far too lazy and arrogant to ever change it." "Execute, Claire. I need screenshots of your home ISP account showing the active session logs and the cookie files from his machine. Meanwhile, I will lay the official groundwork with the Serious Fraud Office. We will strike with absolute speed so he doesn't have time to smell the smoke and move the capital out of Cyprus into another jurisdiction." The next 4 days dissolved into a calculated, agonizing psychological torture. Every evening I returned to my own home, which had transformed into enemy territory. I submissively prepared David's favorite dinners, quietly endured his arrogant, patronizing lectures about how I needed to redeem myself to the family for my selfishness, and meekly begged him for cash to cover minor daily expenses. An absolute, intoxicating sense of triumph radiated from his eyes. He genuinely believed he had broken my spirit entirely, turning me into his personal domestic servant. But at night, once he drifted into a deep, uninterrupted sleep, I carefully slipped out of bed and crept into his dark home office. My heart hammered violently against my throat. Every rustle of the branches outside or creak of the house felt like the approaching footsteps of an executioner. Holding my breath and listening to the silence, I pulled on thin rubber gloves and typed the password into his computer. I found absolutely everything. His browser history contained every single session logged into the banking portals under my identity. Tucked away inside hidden system folders were high-resolution scans of my identification documents, which he had secretly taken while I was heavily medicated during my illness. But the most horrifying, definitive piece of evidence was an encrypted text file titled Project C. Within it, he had meticulously outlined my entire personal profile: passwords, insurance numbers, my mother's maiden name. Interspersed throughout were fixed target dates: when to submit the next loan application, when to intercept specific bank mail, and what psychological levers to pull to erode my willpower. It was a comprehensive, step-by-step master plan for my lifelong enslavement. I duplicated every single file onto a hidden, encrypted flash drive. My hands no longer shook. The snare for my husband was fully set and primed. All that remained was to wait for the final curtain to fall on this drama. Friday, June 12th. The day arrived unusually bright and oppressive for a London summer. The air hovering over the Thames felt thick with heat, and the mirrored glass facades of the city skyscrapers reflected a blinding glare. 2 weeks prior, David had finally condescended to take a job. An old university friend had launched a mid-sized tech company and brought him on as a senior project manager with a highly enviable salary. David was thoroughly intoxicated by this newfound status. He had re-armored himself in flawlessly tailored suits, strutted around the stylish office with an air of immense gravity, and reveled in his role as the magnanimous husband, rescuing his reckless wife from financial ruin. That morning, right before leaving the house, he wrapped an arm around my waist with his habitual patronizing flair and dropped a brief kiss on my cheek. The contact made my stomach churn with violent revulsion, but I forced myself to lower my eyes submissively and squeeze out a meek smile. "I'll swing by the fund to pick you up this evening, Claire," he threw out condescendingly, adjusting his cufflinks. "We'll grab dinner somewhere decent, and I'll allocate your allowance for the month. Be a good girl and don't make me wait." "Of course, darling. I'll be waiting," I replied softly, watching the heavy front door of our townhouse click shut. The moment his car pulled away from the gates, my smile vanished. The time for the final move had arrived. At exactly 2 p.m., 3 dark, unmarked executive vehicles pulled up silently outside the ultra-modern glass and polished concrete tower hosting David's new firm. 4 men in crisp, dark business suits, special agents from the Serious Fraud Office, stepped out, accompanied by 2 uniformed police officers. Emerging from the vehicle right behind them were my attorney, Mr. Vance, and myself. Thanks to the bulletproof evidence compiled over the week, the granular logs from our home router, my official mobile cell tower records proving my location in the city, and, most critically, the contents of the hidden Project C file from the flash drive. A criminal case for grand fraud, identity theft, and forgery of electronic documents had been opened in an unprecedented, blistering 3 days. The legal and asset protection teams at HSBC and Barclays, realizing the sheer scale of the breach and the fact that their internal verification protocols had been cynically manipulated via a compromised digital signature, immediately joined the prosecution and granted investigators unfettered access to their servers. We rode the elevator up to the 7th floor. The vast, open-plan office hummed with standard corporate noise, phones ringing incessantly, managers shouting updates across partitions, the dull clatter of dozens of keyboards. David was positioned at the far end of the floor, commanding the head of a long table inside a glass-walled boardroom. He was leaning back deeply into a premium leather chair, twirling a gold pen between his fingers as he aggressively, arrogantly, delivered a lecture to 3 subordinates. He practically radiated self-importance. He felt like the absolute arbiter of other people's lives. The boardroom door was thrown open with a sharp, echoing thud. The investigators entered in a tight perimeter, led by a stern, silver-haired lead detective. The noise across the open-plan floor died instantly, as if someone had cut the power line. Dozens of employees froze behind their monitors, staring at the uninvited guests. "David Christopher Holloway?" the detective announced loudly, his hardened gaze locking onto the man at the head of the table. David slowly raised his eyes. A microsecond of pure confusion flickered across his features before he scrambled to mask it beneath his standard armor of cold arrogance. He narrowed his eyes, raising his voice. "Yes, that's me. What is the meaning of this, gentlemen? Who do you think you are? We are currently in the middle of a closed strategic briefing. You have clearly entered the wrong room. Please vacate the premises immediately. You are under arrest on suspicion of committing indictable offenses under the UK Fraud Act and the Forgery and Counterfeiting Act." The detective took a step forward, unfurling an official document. "We hold a high court warrant for your immediate arrest and the comprehensive seizure of all personal and corporate digital assets." David let out a brief, strained, dismissive laugh, though his knuckles clenching the gold pen turned visibly white. "Officer, this is absolute nonsense. Which fraud? I am an honest man and a highly sought-after professional. You are clearly confusing me with someone else. What case could I possibly be involved in?" At that exact moment, I stepped out from behind the broad shoulders of the police officers. I took 2 steps forward, approached the table, and with a heavy thud, dropped a thick plastic binder onto the pristine glass surface. On the very top sheet, printed in large, bold lettering, were the cross-reference tables matching our home IP logs, the timestamps of my retina scan access logs at the hedge fund, and a certified official statement from the foreign currency offshore account held in Limassol under his mother Margaret's name. David lowered his eyes to the documents, skimmed the first few lines, and then snapped his head up to glare at me. For a split second, his gray eyes flared with that exact same toxic, domineering malice he had used to suffocate me within the walls of our home for months. He opened his mouth sharply, clearly preparing to scream at me, order me to shut up, or orchestrate a frantic scene to convince his colleagues that his wife had suffered a mental breakdown. But his gaze drifted back to the lines of the offshore statement, where his mother's surname, the precise transaction dates, and the exact multi-million-pound figures he had so painstakingly hidden were laid bare in black and white. Every ounce of color drained from his face in a fraction of a second. He turned a deathly, chalky gray. His polished, expensive, confident facade disintegrated like dry plaster under a sledgehammer. His breathing turned heavy and erratic as his frantic, panicked gaze darted between the binder of documents and the stern, unyielding faces of the police officers. "Claire!" His voice broke violently, turning into an unnaturally thin, pathetic, frightened wheeze, completely stripped of its usual baritone resonance. "Claire, what is this? What kind of sick joke is this? This is a catastrophic mistake. Those are your loans. You took them out yourself. You've just forgotten due to the stress at the fund. Tell them. Confirm to them that this is a mistake." "My IP address never matches yours, David," I replied quietly, but with a cold, ringing clarity that carried across the dead silent floor. "And your elderly mother in Scotland is currently having a very confusing afternoon because police officers are entering her home with a search warrant. Your Project C is officially over." One of the police officers, utilizing a practiced, fluid motion, seized his right arm, forcing him up out of the leather chair. The metal of the handcuffs clicked shut around his wrists with a dry, brutal, definitive snap. David attempted to wrench his arm away, to twist out of the grip, but he was roughly and professionally pinned face down against the polished conference table, his arms locked securely behind his back. His colleagues inside the boardroom watched the scene unfold in absolute, paralyzed horror, shrinking back into their seats. Deep in the open-plan floor, hidden behind a monitor, an employee was already secretly capturing his entire humiliation on a mobile phone camera. He was marched down the long corridor of the commercial tower, flanked by 4 special agents. He walked with his head hung low, completely stripped of his bravado, his arrogance, and his delusions of grandeur. The master manipulator, the architect of psychological servitude and economic domestic abuse, had been reduced before my eyes to a common, pathetic, terrified criminal, popping like a cheap bubble the moment he collided with the immovable, crushing force of the law, hard facts, and undeniable numbers. The legal process of having those fraudulent credit agreements declared null and void, and wiping my credit profile clean of those alleged obligations, demanded an immense amount of time, emotional stamina, and grueling, exhausting court hearings. But thanks to the flawless evidence we compiled, the ISP logs, the cell tower tracking, and, most importantly, a comprehensive, multi-page confession that David personally signed during his 3rd interrogation in exchange for a minor reduction in his pretrial detention conditions, every single bank officially and unconditionally retracted their claims against me. My credit file with the Bureau is once again pristine, restored to its maximum Tier 1 rating. As for my position at the hedge fund, no one fired me. On the contrary, the board of directors and the city chief of security deeply respected the phenomenal composure, ice-cold logic, analytical acumen, and professionalism I demonstrated in independently dismantling such a sophisticated fraud scheme. At the start of this month, I was officially confirmed as a managing partner of the firm, complete with a personal equity stake in the fund. David is currently serving his sentence in a maximum security prison. The Crown Court sentenced him to 7 years of immediate imprisonment without the possibility of parole for the first half of his term for grand fraud, forgery of state and financial instruments, and identity theft. The capital sitting in his mother's offshore account in Cyprus was completely frozen via an international asset forfeiture order and returned down to the last penny to the clearing accounts of HSBC and Barclays to cover the damages. His mother, Margaret, evaded criminal prosecution as an accessory only due to an official independent medical assessment confirming advanced progressive dementia. The elderly woman truly comprehended nothing and had simply submissively signed the international banking papers her loving and attentive son slipped in front of her. Sometimes in the evenings, after a long and highly productive day in the city, I sit in the spacious kitchen of our former Richmond townhouse, slowly sipping a cup of hot jasmine tea. I have already listed the property through a luxury real estate agency. The sale will close in a couple of weeks. I want nothing in my new life to serve as a reminder of that suffocating nightmare. The scent of lavender fabric softener and burnt onions is completely gone from this house. Now, the rooms smell only of fresh-cut flowers, expensive perfume, and an absolute, limitless, intoxicating freedom. Every single night, as I fall asleep in the perfect, tranquil silence of my bedroom, I hold on to one simple yet monumental truth. The most reliable, impenetrable shield against any trap this life can construct is your own knowledge. A cold mind immune to emotional manipulation, and your personal signature, which you must never, under any circumstances, under any pretext, and to any person in the world, allow to be signed for you. Write in the comments below what you would have done in my position if you discovered a truth like this. Would you have pushed the case all the way to an actual prison sentence for your legal husband? Or would you have spared him for the sake of past feelings, beautiful memories, and the years you spent together? Subscribe to the channel Storytime Drama, like this video, and make sure to hit the notification bell so you never miss new shocking real-life stories. Here, we tell the raw truth, no matter how brutal or terrifying it might be. Every perfect facade hides a dark secret. What would you do in her shoes? Let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to like, subscribe to Storytime Drama, and stay tuned, because our next story will shock you even more. See you soon!